welcome to Democratic Dialogues. I'm the host, Rosie Sagall, and I'm here today with Peg Anderson, longtime Democrat and editor, and with Joy Halsted, artist and Democrat. I thought we might start out today with both of you and myself talking a little bit about how and when you became Democrats. So whoever would like to start.
Well, I'll start. I'll say that growing up in a suburb of Boston, I wasn't aware of political parties in a very specific way. My family was not involved in local politics, but you know, it was certainly part of what I understood about our country, and I was aware of it in that way. And I believe that I became a Democrat the first time I voted, and even before that, when John Kennedy was campaigning for president. I helped work on that campaign in Ohio, where I was at college. And so from then on, I think I've never wavered from my identification as a Democrat, and I've been involved in peripheral but different ways over that time since. Joy, what about you?
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I come from a split ticket. My father was a Republican and my mother was a Democrat. In fact, my father looked like Dewey, and people used to stop him in the street, and he was thrilled out of his mind. I don't remember having particular discussions at the dining room table, but my father would often win the argument, but I still supported my mother. And I never doubted somehow that I was a Democrat. And I remember as a child asking my father, what is the difference between a Republican and a Democrat? And he said, well, the Republicans want less government. And my mother said, well, I think it's because the government does more for the people. And that sort of won me over, although they didn't have any fierce arguments about it. And I was very aware of Roosevelt because I am that age, and I thought he was a great hero. And when he died, the whole country, of course, mourned, and life went on. But it was a very emotional thing, but because I'd been imbued with Roosevelt for all of his terms, I never questioned that being a Democrat was the right thing to be, somehow. Even if he made a few mistakes during his reign, if you will, it was good.
Well, unlike you, I grew up in Ohio, as a matter of fact, which I would call a red state now, but then it was sort of a Republican stronghold. And so my parents were very liberal in many ways, but they said, well, if we don't register as Republicans, we aren't going to get to vote in any of the primaries. So I grew up in a household where we talked about ideas and liberal ideas more than attaching them to politics, which is interesting to look back, because it took me a long time to kind of hook things up. Although I did always feel that sort of the Democratic way was the right way. So it would be interesting if we had a person who had been converted with us, because we seem to all kind of grow into that. I would like to ask you what you see as changes since you've been Democrats for many years. Can you talk a little bit about the changes we're seeing or over the years?
And how. I lived in Washington for quite a few years, and at that time, my husband in his various jobs was in and out of the government, but and in some cases had to raise money for various candidates, and a lot of them were Republican because they fit into the ways of thinking. They were liberal Republicans at that time. And you don't have that so much anymore. You had discussions out of the Senate or out of the Congress where people would meet for drinks afterwards, and they didn't shout at each other. They had real respect and discussion with each other, which is no longer true today. And it is, I think, a terrible disservice to the country not to have people talking to each other and listening above all. I feel right now it's a very spiteful time that the Republicans go after the Democrats out of pure spite to get back to their power base. And I find this appalling because it makes the general good of and welfare of the public go down the drain as much as they can do that. I've had a rant.
That's good.
I agree, of course, with what you're saying about the changes. I still remember distinctly a professor in a political science course I took in college talking about American democracy and saying that the reason the two-party system worked so well in the United States was that the two parties were not really ideological. They were, yes, the Republicans were certainly weighted in one direction, and the Democrats, the less government versus the more government orientation, but they were not ideologically opposed, and therefore the two parties could work together in many ways, and compromise was considered part of the way the country worked. And we can look back at the 20th century now and see how much progress in civil rights, social justice, women's rights, how much progress was made. And to me, that seemed natural, logical, and correct. And we seem to be going in a different direction now. And I think it's frightening to us Democrats to see that we're not having the conversation across party lines. Obviously, there has to be some of that, but it isn't as easy. And whether it started in the 80s or started before that, I don't really know. I think you can look back at the roots of all to find all kinds of signs of this change. Some people say that the country has always been basically a conservative country. I don't know whether that's true, but it's painful to see that it's harder to have the dialogue that did exist, or at least we think that it existed in the past. Those are the changes I see. I'm certainly very thrilled that we saw a huge surge of support for the Democratic Party in the last presidential election, and I hope that that will perhaps work toward more dialogue and more progress.
Well, yeah, I agree with both of you, and I think it's one thing that Joy said is true. It's not simply partisanism, it's this respect. It's beyond partisanism, I think. It's not that simple. In fact, it's not simple at all what's happening.
No.
And as she said, we got so much, both of you, we got so much done at one time, even though we still had two strong parties. People, when I was growing up, were very much attached to their parties, but somehow we made some progress, and we seem to have just ground to a halt in many ways. And so we might as well go ahead and talk about what's probably on our minds is what's happening in Congress today as we speak about health care. And I think it's more than just the health care, it's any issue.
Yes. Well, I think that I feel very strongly that the press has a lot to do, they like a good fight. And maybe some of the differences are out there very strongly, but they whip it to a frenzy, and it makes it harder for work to get done. And I think that those that don't follow the issues, and in a sense, not that many people have the time to find the specifics, and they're so complicated now. Everything has an attachment to it of one thing or another. It is hard to differentiate and to figure out a straight line when it all zigzags, and there is so much emotion involved, more than than logic, goodness knows. And I think that the Republicans are scaremongers, and they have been for quite a while, and that is their tool to people that are unobservant of the true scene. Most of us don't have time to follow every detail, and we get the news by Fox and CNN and other places, which are very prejudiced in their own direction, and you associate with the news you want to hear. Seemingly, and that is at extreme ends at some point. And I think in some cases the media is to blame for what they do. They give Rush Limbaugh an enormous amount of exposure when he only talks to about 2% of the population. It's a very small amount. Yet they're on a rant, and he's quoted, and he does a lot of damage through the media, I think, not just his own words.
So what can we do to counteract that?
Pull the plug on him.
Yeah. Well, you touched on a thing that lately is really bothering me, the 24-hour news cycle and the need for a fight. You always have to have two sides represented in this fight when maybe it isn't that even. It's not.
That's right.
It's not.
That's right.
It's 99 and 1%, not 50-50, but the news will make it look as though there's these two warring sides. So I think the news is a huge issue. It seems like every time a Democrat says something wrong, their screams go up for apologies, and look at what the Republicans are doing. It's like, what in the world is going on? And that is news. That is the news. I was going to actually ask this much more toward the end, but I am very curious to know from both of you. I try to stay informed, but I get burnout. I just feel I can't take it anymore.
Yes.
So I find it very difficult to stay on top of things without just thinking, oh my God. I don't know if you have any suggestions or how you both deal with the news. And
well, you do your best to stay in touch, with, as you say, without a burnout. But there is so much, the news is so fast today, every minute it changes. And every breath that Obama takes is perused and investigated and commented upon. And in the other days, it used to be much simpler. There was a time span between having to have an instant reaction. And today's media, with all the different electronic devices we have, you have instant input. And there's no way the brain, I think, at least mine, can handle all that.
Right, I agree. I actually don't pay attention to the details of exactly what's going on in the House or the Senate on the health care bill, because I feel that there will be so many changes before the bill becomes law. I assume it will become law, and I'm certainly hoping so. But I think we do need to, I feel it's important to try to keep up on some level, but I still stick to newspapers, reading the New York Times and listening to opinions, and try to stay informed, but it's very hard these days, and you hear so many dissonant voices. I don't pay attention to blogs. Do either of you?
No, as a matter of fact, no, that would be just overload.
I don't know how anyway.
No, that
I'm not a blogger.
But it's there's a lot. We're inundated, and we all know that. But we do the best we can.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, as a Democrat, I feel responsible to know what goes on.
Exactly.
I think Democrats are more responsible than Republicans in a very conserving and necessary way for the public in general. And I feel the main difference is the Republicans don't give a damn. They will use any means whatsoever to accomplish to try to get back into power. They really wish to destroy the Obama administration, and they're right out front about it.
Yeah,
make no
amazing.
bones. And I find that extraordinary. I think not since the Civil War have we had such a split.
And at times it seems attacking the president is treason. Or I mean, at this level, it feels
that's
like we're
interesting.
accepting an awfully scary level of the way we speak of our president.
Yes, that outburst in the Senate, which was inexcusable, and the Republicans are proud of it, many of them.
But you're not suggesting that people who disagree with
No.
president are
It's
treasonous. No.
things that really
The opposite.
People with, I won't be able to quote them now, placards and things that border on death threats. And we're somehow letting that go by, you know, because I think, again, it's overload. It's like...
And a lot of them are printed by Dick Armey, you know, to come down and they hold them. They're not handmade signs. These tea parties are extraordinary and well organized and atrocious.
So you'd say that we have to be organized on the other side, and if so, how do we do that? It's very hard to fight negativity, but it seems that it's an important
And it is true that you
task.
kind of think, well, I'll make this my focus, and then there's this, and there's this.
Yes, it's
it
true.
keeps coming at us so quickly. I find that it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I do get tired of we Dems seem to occasionally say too much, well, we should apologize. We should, and that
We're
is who
nice
we
guys.
are. Yes, we are. That is who we are.
We're polite. We're nice.
And yes, exactly. But that is who we are. And the other thing, going back to what you were saying, Joy, that it comes down to we have to have the 1 minute, not 1 minute, 2-word phrase for everything, and that's not how we do things. If you have a more
That's not the way the world works.
No. So I hate that kind of harping on, well, you have to be able to sum that up much more easily.
Yeah.
And that's not
Right.
how, if you're going to be fair and honest about it, you can't do that. So,
Well, we don't want to be down dirty either.
no.
And it's strange that a lot of the public wonders why we're not.
Yeah.
Why don't you get up there and fight and get nasty too? And it's not what a democracy really works well with in any
That's
way.
right. That's right. You're right. We have to be true to ourselves somehow and get through this. This leads a little bit to another topic I was thinking about, that we're seeing a lot of statistics that say young people aren't voting and aren't becoming political. Certainly, well, we just know that it's hard. It's a little bit hard to get involved anyway for some reason. But do you have any thoughts about how we could begin to involve younger people?
Well, Obama certainly did by this last election. There was an enormous
that's true. Yes,
input of young people because they had a reason.
Right.
And I think the reasons are forgotten very quickly when it goes back to business as usual almost, not quite. So it's very hard to keep it sustained.
That's right.
I don't think young people are disinterested. I think they have very complex lives these days.
You're right.
That can't, I think of my daughter and her family, and their lives are incredible to me. I couldn't do what they're doing.
No.
And they're involved
It's a real
with,
balancing act.
yeah, they're very much
That's right.
community involved, and when it comes to national things, very much so. But I won't say it's underground, but it is not as noticeable. They don't come out in droves the way the older adults would come out and do things. But I may be giving them a disservice on this.
I think so. I think that young people are, well, certainly the campaign of last fall did bring out a huge amount of support.
Yeah, you're right.
Being in New Hampshire to help with the campaigning there, the headquarters in Salem that I
My granddaughters
was at,
went.
Yeah, it was just full of college-age volunteers, some of whom had left their college year to work on the campaign, and there was great enthusiasm and a lot of energy. And of course, that's the thing that's hard to harness or keep harnessing.
Right.
I think there's been an attempt that way. Certainly, I hear a lot On the computer, I get messages from, well, I was a member of MoveOn.org, and I still am, or I'm not sure if member is correct, but I certainly hear from them, and also Organizing for America.
That's
and
very true.
I get personal messages from
I do
our
too.
president.
Yes.
and
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
a wonderful thing.
It is.
I can't say that I respond to everyone because there is a tremendous drumbeat of, give us money for this, give us money for that.
Absolutely.
And it's hard. We all know that. But I think the effort is important, and I hope it's working. I think there's more support than we're guessing.
Good.
I think we're a little bit sounding a little defeatist because of the loudness of the extremists on the other side.
And the media giving them
sure.
the opportunity.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot. Certainly I see in my son and my daughter, I see a lot of enthusiasm for democratic causes and some activism where they can fit it into their busy lives.
You're absolutely right
That's
about
the
their
thing.
lives.
You good
And
Democratic parent, you.
And your daughter has raised two very activist daughters,
Good.
and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that is probably, we were just talking about our families being the source of our,
Yes, that's right, and it continues. in
Well,
a
it's by
stronger
example
way.
within the families, depending on how much time and interest they have. Yes.
Right,
and young lives are just crazy busy, so it does. But I think that you're right about the last campaign, but I'm thinking also about the complexity and what, like the health care. How do we interact with that? It's so complicated. Even those of us paying close attention get confused. Where the bill is, what the bill means.
How watered down it gets.
Yeah, what the
Right.
significance is of some instant
and how it will
change.
work out in the end.
Yeah.
And it is hard to counteract. Someone said just in glancing comment in passing something about, they're taking away our health care choices, and this was in a conversation that had nothing to do with politics, and I was taken aback and didn't know I didn't answer it because I didn't really understand what
We have many
that was
choices, though, yes. And the thing that really is distressing is people saying, not realizing that Medicare is socialized medicine. My goodness, take that away and people would be down, in goodness knows where.
Yeah.
That makes the discussion difficult when you say, we came out the other day, we heard there was a tea party, and at the last minute we came out with our signs, and it was very last minute because we didn't know it was happening, and it was pouring. But we're there, and the discussion, I do think it would...
So you went to the meeting?
With opposing signs.
I see.
And we were across the street, so we're kind of yelling across the street. It was very interesting. It was very depressing because there's those signs I didn't expect to see in my own community. Obama is a Marxist. Obama is a Leninist. A czarist tyrant.
Were they handmade or were they?
These were handmade.
Oh.
These were all handmade. It wasn't a huge, but I don't know how much of that was really pouring, so I don't know how big it would have been. But I realized it is good to try to be a little prepared to know what to say because it's so outlandish. I just want to get mad and say, what are you talking about? Why would you think that? Right. And instead of, I don't know that I can have a dialogue.
No, it's really hard to do because the emotions run so high on both sides. There's no, linear way of approach or any logic involved. And I don't know where the emotions come from. I think it's fear and anxiety for the most part. And
fear of change.
Yes, exactly, because you don't know what the change means.
Right. And
if you can be reassured, I watched last night a doctor talking about the Medicare and all the rest of it, and of course the insurers are the ones that are in the middle of all this, and he didn't seem to bother him very much. He said, well, they don't take a very big percentage, but the fact they take any percentage of the health care makes an enormous difference, and I don't think most people recognize that because they feel they're choosing their insurers, which should be out of the meld anyway.
Well,
completely.
yeah, I am definitely for the public option, so
Absolutely.
it's very
I am
difficult.
too,
to
and
me.
I'm terrified that it won't make it, but I just
Well.
pray that it will. I've got to do more than pray, but I don't know what I can do.
Yeah, that is hard to. We can fax our representatives.
That's
of course,
true.
coming from our state,
I know, we're in a state
we
that,
need to somehow.
but that's still important because
It
it
is.
gives them strength to,
You're right
to hear
about
from
that.
us, and I think that we need to do
Well,
that.
you have to do it to out of state because Massachusetts has some of the best health care. It isn't totally
Yes,
perfect.
yes.
And they're still working on it. I think
It's never
they have,
going to be perfect, but
No.
we can certainly improve it.
Yes.
So,
And as the elderly, and I speak as one, get more and more time running out on what their health care options may be if they're destroyed. It's frightening.
Yeah, it is.
I feel pretty secure so far, but I get pretty mad.
Yeah, I find myself getting too angry because then I'm not doing any good. I'm just getting angry.
that's right. So
And that's
we've got to
something-
turn the anger into
Yes, into action.
into action.
Yeah.
And
Positive.
even if we
That's
are
right.
in Massachusetts and this is a liberal democratic state, we should let our representatives know how we feel. But,
I think you're very right about that,
Yeah.
Peg.
I
It's
can't say that I've been
easy to
doing it,
sort
but
of
it's,
coast, not
right.
coast, but
Yes,
think
indeed,
what
coast.
can I do?
yeah, right.
Well, our
And,
representative is very good on this.
True,
Yes.
but the more he hears from people who say, keep on,
Yes,
the,
yes.
the more it will reinforce his beliefs.
That's true
Allow
because
him
he's
to fight
probably
harder.
hearing from the other side too.
Of course.
Somewhere that used to.
Oh.
All right.
Sorry.
Is it finished?
No, we should wrap it up a bit.
I was just going to say very quickly, it used to be that when you wrote to your congressman, you would have to write on heavy paper because they weighed the letters.
Oh, that's
a funny
Email
point.
is very different.
That's funny. Yeah, you're right. Good.
But they do count them.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. It all counts.
Well, something like this is good.
Great. Well, this is a good positive note to end on for today. I feel like we barely touched on many
There's
topics.
many things to talk about, aren't there? It's I don't know. I was hoping we could talk about global warming, but we're not going to get
Next
to that.
time.
Next time.
Well, thank you for watching Democratic Dialogues. This has been Rosie Sagall, and I've been here with Peg Anderson and Joy Halsted. Thank you.